everybody. Welcome to our third workshop. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to get started on this workshop. I think you all are going to enjoy our guest speaker this evening. I think gonna learn a lot. Our topic of our workshop this evening is on the topic of how do I prepare for a professional interview? So you're going into the interview, maybe you've gone to career fairs, maybe your mentors hooked you up and connected you with someone at their company. Maybe you've gotten some referrals somewhere else. Doesn't really matter. You are about to step into the interview. Maybe you've already had interviews before. This workshop is about how to think about interviews differently. We're bringing in guest speakers who are experts on this topic from around the world to give you insight and wisdom on how to make the most out of the professional interview. So this workshop is going to be about 45 minutes long with, and I encourage you to ask questions throughout the workshop. I'm going to ask you 3 questions during the workshop, which I'll have you answer. That's how you get credit for being here. You're now midway through the program so far. You should have already had your first conversation with your mentor. Hopefully you've already started setting up your second conversation with your mentor. If you have not, or you're struggling to get in touch with your mentor, please email support@ambition-in-motion.com. We need to take care of you so then you can get connected and make the most out of this program. So really, this program is all about how can you prepare for the first professional interview. Really, what you're selling your interviewer on is your ability, essentially your future potential opportunity. Essentially, you are selling them on your potential, because at the end of the day, people are not expecting you to come in and be the expert on XYZ topic. They are expecting you to be a willing learner and someone that's eager to gain knowledge and to be a better professional. If you can convey that, you will get the opportunity. But it will be competitive, especially in highly competitive industries. And I know that anybody that's in this program is more likely than not going into a career that's competitive. I mean, you would not have gotten a mentor had you not wanted to take your level, take your career, take your life to the next level. So with that said, I want to encourage you to keep your head up, keep applying, put yourself out there for more opportunities, and leverage the insight and knowledge that you're getting in these workshops to make yourself and to help you better prepare yourself for the interview. Now, before we get started into our main program, I want to ask you a quick question, and that question is, when it comes to the interview, how do you want people to feel about you? In other words, what feeling are you trying to convey about yourself when you are in an interview? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that, because I think if we are more intentional about how we want other people to feel about us in the interview, our likelihood of actually having that happen increases substantially. I mean, I've talked about in past workshops, strategy, story, state, which I will talk about in a moment, but this is a really big part of the story part. Like, what is the story that you're telling yourself? Now, I think sometimes we can interpret that as psyching ourselves up, getting ourselves confident, getting ourselves pumped for why we're going to be successful. And I think that's great. But I think if we could take it to another level, that being intentional about how we want other people to perceive us. So if we want them to perceive us as confident, or if we want them to perceive us as knowledgeable, or if we want them to perceive us as eager to learn and having potential, it could be a variety of things. But what I really want you to do is I really want you to identify feelings that you want other people to feel about you when you enter their world. Because you can be intentional about that. Your likelihood of having them actually feel that is much greater. But if you don't set the intention, you have no idea how they're going to feel about you. You've got really no control over it. But if you intentionally think to yourself, I want people to think of me as confident. Okay, what am I going to do that's going to convey convey confidence? Really, it's all about whatever that feeling you want to convey. Make sure that you are taking actions and being intentional about ensuring that other people view you that way, and that you come in trying to actively think about actions that you can take that will help other people perceive you in that light. So let's start under the next part of our workshop. Now, I've talked about this in the past before, and I've talked about this in previous workshops, but one of the big things that I always love to stress is the 3 keys to success in the program. There are 3 of them. That is your strategy, that is your story, that is your state. I bring it up every single time because it is that important. And the reason why it's important is because if we are not honing our strategy, honing our story, honing our state, we are not setting ourselves up for successful. If we let someone else drive our roadmap for us, we could end up in a location that we do not want to be. But if we are intentional about our story, if we're intentional about our strategy, if we're intentional about our state, we are much more likely to get to where we would like to go. It's kind of like the law of attraction. When we put it out there and we put it out to more people, when we're more intentional about what we want to accomplish, and we're more intentional about how we are going to convey our bodies and ourselves to other people, the likelihood that it comes back to us is much greater. So I want to talk about state. State is the most important thing. Like physically, where are you at in your life, in your world? What is going on? I don't care how stressed you are. I don't care how mad you are. I don't care how dejected you are. I don't care of anything negative going on in your world. If you can get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, especially for the interview, you will be successful. I'm a big proponent of power poses. I'm a big proponent of screaming at the top of your lungs and dancing out. In fact, I'd like to do that with you right now. So for the next 30 seconds, what I like you to do is I like you to stand up. I like you to shimmy it out. I like you to shake it out. I like you to scream at the top of your lungs. Just scream at the top of your lungs at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Just let it out, let it loose, let it go, because you've got nothing to lose. I don't care if it's a popularity contest. I don't care if you're in a library. I don't care if you're in a house. What do you have to lose? This is not a coolness effort here. It's about making an impact and preparing yourself physically for being successful. What is the price of success? Getting yourself into a state conducive for being successful. Maybe looking a little weird to some of your colleagues, coworkers, or peers, but what is that cost to you in the long run? Nothing. They're gonna say, you know, hey, what were you doing? Why were you dancing? Why were you screaming at the top of your lungs? You say, hey, I'm getting myself in a state conducive for being successful. Maybe they've never heard about it before. Maybe they've never learned. You can educate them on this. So don't worry about how other people are perceiving you when you are going to get yourself into a state that's going to level up your game, especially when it comes to the interview. Now, you may not want to do this in the office of a business that you are about to interview in, but you could certainly do it in the bathroom, in a bathroom stall. Get yourself into a 2-minute power pose. Stand up like Superman or Superwoman, or put your arms out like as if you're a star. There's a lot of things that you can do to get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, but you should be doing something, because if you're not, you are letting the way that other people perceive you essentially come up to chance. And you don't want to chance it, especially for the opportunity of a lifetime. And you have no idea which opportunity is the opportunity of a lifetime. It may not be this job. It could be the next one. If you make a positive impression in an interview and you may not land that job, that interviewer could have really loved how you interviewed, and that person may not be at that company for forever, or they might be, and they might come up with a new job. They might reach out to you personally to have you come and interview. It's all about the relationship. It's all about how they perceive you. It's all about that impression you leave. Your state is critical. Now, what is the story you tell yourself for why you are going to be successful? This is something we kind of did earlier when I asked you, how do you want other people to feel about you in the interview? This is a great exercise to prepare yourself for a professional interview. If you are intentional about how you want other people to feel about you, you are going to put yourself into a position to succeed, because then you're much more likely to manifest that outcome. Literally, law of attraction, putting it out there. I want other people to feel XYZ about me. Confident, smart, intelligent, well prepared. I don't care what it is. Maybe it's a weakness that you have, but you like to have them perceive it as a strength. Maybe it's a strength that you have that you'd really like to amplify even as a greater strength. Doesn't matter, but set an intention of something. Because if you don't set an intention of something, it could be wild in terms of what they actually perceive of you. Now, the last key is your strategy. What are the things that you're going to do to make the most out of this interview? Are you going to come prepared with questions? Are you going to come prepared with doing background research on the company? Are you going to make an intentional, focused effort on taking notes during the conversation, so then you're asking poignant, direct questions to the interviewer that are relevant about his or her life? Are you going to do the things that you need to do to be the most successful in an interview, or are you not? So the strategies you're going to learn from our guest speaker later on in this workshop, I think you're going to really enjoy what our guest speaker has to say. But before we jump into our guest speaker, I want to talk about one final thing, and that is getting yourself into a routine that can help you prepare for an interview. One of the things that I like to do, have an accountability partner. This could be it could be anybody, but what you want to do with your accountability is you want to share with your accountability partner 3 things that you learned this week and 1 thing that you've done to get closer to that internship or job. What this does, and you might think this sounds silly, you might think this sounds crazy, it could be another student in the program, it could be a friend of yours, does not matter. But what we've learned, what we've observed is that students who land jobs and internships through this program are substantially more likely to actually land that job and internship if they told other people about their experience. One of the questions we ask at the end of the question is, on average, how many other people did you tell about your experience in the program? What we ended up learning was that when a student told 20 or more people about their experience in Ambition in Motion, their likelihood of also landing their job and internship was substantially higher than students who didn't. There's a direct correlation to you telling more people about your experience and what you're learning in this program to actually landing the outcomes you like than not. So I want to challenge you to identify an accountability partner. Share with them 3 things that you've learned this week and one thing that you've done to help you get closer to landing that job or internship. Now, the other big thing that I want to bring up with you is a referral program. So we are now starting to open up the applications and the signups for next fall. One, I'd love for you to be in part of the program again. You can get a new mentor, you're going to get new content, you're going to learn from new speakers. But more importantly, I want you to encourage other students to get involved as well. We have a referral program for you, so then you are discounted to get in the program next semester. Essentially, anytime that anybody applies, we ask them, how'd you hear about us? If they write in your name, you get credit. If you don't mind being an ambassador for this program and helping encourage other students to get involved and take advantage of this, I would greatly appreciate it, because it would help us make a bigger impact on more people, which is really what our goal is. So let's jump into our workshop. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. I'm so excited to transition into this next part of the workshop. Remember to answer the 3 questions that we asked during the workshop. That's how you get credit for being here within 24 hours of the workshop going live. If you got any questions, any concerns, any issues with anything at all, please email support@ambition-in-motion.com. We will answer those questions, concerns, and issues. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. Hey everybody, I'm so excited for our workshop this evening, and to continue on this workshop, we're here to talk about how to prepare for the interview. We've got an awesome guest tonight. His name is Mike Bird. Mike is the founder of Coach Wazo. Mike is a career coach for new grad who is on a mission to help Generation Z make an effective transition into the workforce. Mike, thanks for being here.
Garrett, thank you so much for having me.
So we're talking about how to prepare for the interview. You've done this quite a few times for a lot of students or recent grads getting to really cool companies. Could you just share with us a little bit about your background and how you got into this type of work?
Yeah, sure. So, I've always kind of been in coaching, and I come originally from an athletics background where I was working with athletes as a coach. Always kind of working with anyone from sort of late high school to end of college, university age, and I've always just been in love and full of passion with this group. About halfway through my 20s, I decided that I no longer wanted to pursue football coaching as a full-time career option. And then try to figure out how could I continue to work with all of these awesome people and still be a coach and do all of these things that I loved. And so I discovered coaching in a bit of a different capacity. And as the question of, again, how do I serve these people, it became clear that a lot of the needs that they have are in the career space. And so my own life lessons for my own career, by kind of my knowledge of people and how they work and think, just creating structures for people and seeing them thrive in them, that's kind of led me to where I am now. And it's been a really cool kind of life experiment that I'm going to continue with for as long as I have the energy for it.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I mean, it's such a selfless pursuit that you're on, just to help people pursue their passions. And by the way, I'm with you. I'm aligned on that. I love that. So let's talk about the interview, because a lot of students, we're in this coronavirus-ish period. We're, kind of starting to get through it, but still there's a lot of things to kind of like think about in terms of the transition of work and how things have changed and how things have transitioned. What are some of, I guess let's start out with some of the new bits of advice that have come up because of the coronavirus that college students should be aware of, whether that be in pursuit of their internship or their professional job.
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that's become a lot more apparent and common is just the use of technology throughout the whole recruitment process, right? It's in a time of social distancing, we've obviously seen the decline of the on-site in-person interview replaced by the Zoom interview, the Google Meet, and that obviously creates a little bit of a different set of constraints on the person who then has to show up and physically show up on screen in a bit of a different way than they might have just walking into an office There's still an element of kind of understanding a dress code and how people might tend to behave in that kind of environment. But certainly just the use of technology is one big change in becoming kind of confident on screen. Lots of people, you look at social media, and there seem to be some people who are super comfortable going on and doing an Instagram live or Facebook live or whatever. And there's like millions of people who are not like that. And so it's really about, like, do you have that same kind of presence? Are you still yourself in front of a screen and a camera? Even on the side of like getting to the interview process, where we see things like a technology like Higher View, where you can do a video, basically like a video screen. You would end up speaking into your computer, answering some questions posed to you by a robot. Like, those kinds of things to me are actually pretty awkward, but we've seen a lot more of that in the last several months.
You know, what's interesting about that whole point is this online presence, or this Zoom meeting presence. I'm in the current process of hiring somebody right now for Ambition in Motion. And I can tell you, and I know it sounds crazy, but I can tell if I like a person within the first 10 seconds of the video call. Like, if you show up late, like, it's very apparent on a video.
Totally.
And so I think, one, definitely show up early. Like, err on the side of showing up early, if anything. If like you're waiting for me, that's fine, whatever. But if I'm waiting for you, like, that automatically is a turn off. And I'm very aware of it because I can see my time, my clock right next to the Zoom meeting. But then the other big thing is the transition into the Zoom call. I mean, like, if you struggle getting onto a Zoom call, I'm thinking to myself, this person doesn't understand technology. Like, even if this person is a young person, like, I think the general assumption of like a lot of older people, especially like Gen Xers, they think like, oh, young people know technology. But if you're, our baby boomers, if they're thinking to themselves like, you're struggling to get into the Zoom meeting, I don't know how the heck you're going to handle our technology. I mean, those are the assumptions that we start to formulate, and it's natural. Like, we formulate that impression of you within the first 10 seconds of you hopping on the video call. So what are some tips that you have for making that positive first impression on the interview?
Yeah, I'd say, like, and this is true for anyone, whether I think it's in person or on video, but definitely based off of your comment around how quickly we make our judgments based on initial impression visually. So, I mean, yes, be aware of the platform that you're going to use. If you've never used it before, have some sense of just how you can log on to it. Make sure that you are prepared. Have an actual look. You don't have to have a Hollywood movie studio in behind to show up and look okay on video. But if you can have lighting that makes your face nice and apparent, and just have no major sound distractions in the back. Like, try, and if you can, I know some people might be living next to a construction site. Well, if you know what, you might almost be better trying to run the interview from a park, because if the other person can't hear you, it's just not going to be in your favor, and it's going to be a distraction for you while you're trying to perform in that space. I think aside from that, there's also just the visual part, right? It is really, it's really easy to look bad on camera if you've never if you don't have an understanding of just lighting. So if you have light that comes onto your face, if you have a kind of a lighter background with a darker clothing top, however you're structured, kind of from the shoulders up. I know where I say that right now, and I'm actually wearing like a light pink shirt, but it kind of matches my skin. It's that's really critical in terms of the first impression as well. You just want to have a sense of being able to be seen as yourself, so that the people can see that you're comfortable in this new spot.
Yeah. And with that and being seen, I think also being seen in terms of how you view the camera. Focus on the dot, not the other person.
Yes.
That's, I think, one of the biggest transitions that I had to adjust to was you have to focus on the dot of where the lens is looking at you.
Totally.
I know in like the movies, they say, don't look at the camera. That's not the case for the interview. Look at the camera, because if you're looking at the dot, it gives them the impression that you're looking into their eyes. Whereas if you're looking at them, and let's say it's a couple inches down on your screen, it looks like you're looking below them. And that's actually not great for eye contact. Our brains are still adjusting to this whole virtual interview thing.
That's a good point. Me too, honestly. And it depends on kind of what I'm doing, whether it's a call. Sometimes I'm a lot better on a webinar, I find, but you're making a great point. It is a habit that even I have to remind myself of sometime, to bring the eyes up. Yeah.
So let's talk about the interview itself. Let's say we have reached out to a company, we really like them, we're excited about them. Well, I guess maybe before the interview, before we even gotten excited, let's say we reached out, we applied, they said, let's schedule an interview. What can I do to prepare for that interview?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, as much research as you can into understanding, I think, the people that you would be potentially working with. Can you get a relationship built in some way, shape, or form beforehand, before you actually go into the interview? I often talk about like this ideal situation where you walk into the interview room and you know the people there already, and it doesn't necessarily mean that all of the pressure of the situation falls out, but it does give you maybe a little bit more confidence in just sort of being who you are more naturally. And then if they already have a strong first impression of you from a previously established relationship, you're just really there to now like confirm the trust that they have in you. And that's a huge game changer.
You made a really good point about connecting with people before the interview and doing your homework and prep work. Now, I guess I want to take a quick moment to ask the students in the audience, have you ever taken the time on LinkedIn to go ahead and reach out to somebody or people that work at a company that you're interested in before the interview? And have you ever said, hey, I'm interviewing for a role, this XYZ role at your company. I'd love to connect and learn a little bit more about your job and what you do. I guess one, if you've done that, how did it go? Post that in the comment section. If you've not done that, how could you try to do that into the future? Could you try to use LinkedIn, or what are some thoughts about things that you think might be feasible for you in your own personal comfort level and situation for trying to build that relationship before the interview? Post in the comment section. Would love to learn about that. But yeah, Mike, let's jump in. So you said prepping for the interview, getting to know people. Do you ever use LinkedIn for that sort of stuff?
Oh yeah, totally, for sure. I mean, whether it's just from the sort of like baseline level of getting to know a person from their profile, you might be able to find some really cool things about their background that you can kind of just use at the beginning to create a little bit of small talk and rapport. I'm not necessarily a fan of the idea of small talk, but when you think of it as, how do I stoke this relationship and really prime this person to be sharing space and conversation with me, it's really, really easy. There might be something in terms of their education that resonates with you. Maybe you've experienced something that's similar. Maybe they come from a bit of a different background from the role that they currently have. Let's just say, for example, like if I was to be interviewed by someone who I know was also a past football coach, for example, that would be right away where I would go to in the early going to just sort of create conversation and rapport right off the bat. I think the other thing I wanted to really mention in terms of preparation, so we talked about people and then talk about problems, and can you get a sense of what are some of the big challenges that a company is facing? At the end of the day, an interview is really your chance to describe how you could potentially solve problems for other people. If you don't really know what the problems that an organization is facing, then it's just hard to deliver in that particular way. So people, get to know them in advance, and oftentimes through those people get to know some of the problems, and that's kind of where informational interviewing can become a really great strategy in terms of just sort of getting a sense of what is it that you're going to be asked to do, and how can you sort of beat the interviewer to the punch and express the value that you can bring by solving those problems.
I love that. I think that's a really good piece of advice. There's a couple of things that, just because I'm in this process of interviewing for a role at Ambition Emotion right now, I am consciously aware of this. The rapport building is so crucial. If you tell me something that relates to me and we can connect on like a non-work level, I immediately like you substantially more. Like if you say, hey, you're also a Chicago Bears fan, boom, I'm already going to like you a whole lot more. If you tell me you went to Indiana University, great, I'm going to ask you about what dorm you stayed in and things that your favorite restaurant in Bloomington. If you tell me that there's a connection between us, I'm immediately going to like you more. Another thing that I started observing, I guess before I share that observation, I love this concept of preparing for the interview and knowing what their challenges is or what their challenges are. Sometimes it might not necessarily be evident, but one way you could go about identifying this is, especially if they're a public company, on their investments, on their stock options, they have a quarterly stock call where literally you can look at all the updates within their company over the past quarter. And what's cool is you can look at that data, that news, that research, that information, and you can say, oh, I noticed that XYZ thing has happened. How has that affected your core business? Shows that you did the core research And it might give you insight into what one of their biggest challenges is because they chose to act in that certain way. Maybe they raised a Series C round for if they're, let's say, a young startup, or let's say they, I don't know, so they had an IPO, or anything happened within their company that helped or hurt their business. Seeing that on the news shows that you did your homework, and asking that question can give you a better idea into their challenges. But the other thing that I think is critical for the interview is when giving answers, keep it brief. One of the biggest things that I've noticed in my own interviews is when someone drags on a response, I immediately, like, I zone out. Like, I can't pay attention anymore. Like, I probably, and I'll be honest here, I probably listen to the first 45 seconds of what somebody says. And if it's not answering the exact question I just asked, if it's beating around the bush and it's going into like different directions, if they're not telling a story that's engaging me, I am zoning out. I won't be rude and interrupt you, but I may not fully hear everything that you're saying. What are your thoughts on that, Mike? Have you ever experienced that, or do you have any suggestions for how students can be more intentional about exactly how they're answering the questions that they're being asked in an interview?
Yeah. So, I mean, as many words as it takes to express the value you can bring or how you can solve the problem, and no more. If you're repeating something, and I think we can all be guilty of that at times, we can sometimes say a point and then we can restate it because we're maybe not as fully confident in our answer as we'd like to be. But do not go past that point where you start to see them, sometimes even visually, right, just zoning out on your answer. It's not helpful for sure. The big thing that's helped me as a coach in terms of really getting more concise and giving people feedback is actually writing out feedback for people so that I, as a coach, am not very long-winded. So as someone who's preparing for an interview, I'm not saying necessarily that you want to script answers to questions, but if you're writing out a story that's relevant to the interview that you're about to go into, if it expresses something that you bring to the table that's unique and that would really help that employer, go ahead, write out the story and then revise it and then rewrite it if you have to from scratch. But actually find the right number of words and phrases that come together that keep it concise, but also make sure that the picture is complete.
I love that idea. I love the idea of stories, but the key with stories is practice. Practice, 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 practice. There needs to be initial problem and some adversity that you had to overcome. That adversity has to be painful. Everybody has to relate to it, feel it, engage with it. If they can't, then if people can't engage with your problem, they're not going to engage with your solution. So the problem has to be legit, which means that you might have to be a little bit vulnerable. You might have to share something that didn't go the way you wanted it to, and it has to be something that other people face. Like, sometimes I'll hear stories of, like, people are like, well, I've always been accustomed to being a 4.0 student, and this one professor was looking like he was going to give me an A minus, and then I went to his office hours and we really talked it through, and he ended up giving A on my essay, and so I was able to get that up to a 4.0. That's a bad story. That's like the ultimate story of privilege. No one wants to hear that shit. It's not engaging. It needs to be a real problem that you overcame. Yeah. I know I share this in the program. I share this with other students, that I was a former drug dealer that got caught. And I'm very open about it, but I think what that does is it gives an idea of, like, a real problem that other people can be like, holy crap, like, I can relate to the problem. But once you've created a great problem, the solution will be so much more engaging, and it'll be so much stronger. If you a really strong story will seal the deal for you. I think that makes you memorable. That makes you sticky.
100%. I can just use our own background and the relationship that we have. It's been a few months now that we first spoke, and when you told me you were a former drug dealer, I still remember that exact conversation. I still remember recording a podcast interview with you and you talking about your story as though it happened yesterday. And that is the power of story, right? Is it just embeds emotion in the person who's listening to it if they can connect. I like your point there. No one really wants to hear about how you climb Mount Everest by starting 50 meters from the top and going to the summit. That's not cool. But yeah, like that. Yeah, I think it's called narrative transportation, is the sort of phenomenon where the person who is listening, watching, hearing a story, right? We go to a movie, we read a book, it's the same experience. If we can see ourselves somehow in the problem and in the eventual resolution of that problem, then yes, we create strong impressions on people and further trust, which is what we're really trying to get the most out of in an interview.
That's exactly it. Because if they can't trust you, they're not going to hire
Yeah.
you. And I love that point that you made about that narrative arc, that whole just building it together. Makes me think of a question I would love to ask the students. What is a piece of adversity? You don't necessarily need to have the full story played out, but what's a bit of adversity that you went through? Post in the comment section. I'm not even necessarily saying that you got the resolution. Maybe it's something stressful that you're going through right now. You don't necessarily have an answer to it, but you know it's stressing you out. You know it's adversity. Post in the comment section. We'd love to learn about it. Be be open about this. This is a safe, comforting environment. You can be vulnerable here. Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about it. So, Mike, let's talk about the resume and cover letter. I mean, this is something that a lot of students stress out about. It's something that everyone has to do. What are tips and tactics that you've leveraged to really help people make the most out of that resume and cover letter?
Yeah, it's a great question, honestly. And there are people who specialize their entire work around just writing a resume. You'd think that it's something that's really easy to do, but especially in really competitive situations, it's something that really deserves a lot of attention. So, I mean, the big thing where a lot of people are starting off maybe on the wrong foot is they're going in a responsibility task oriented direction with what they're writing on the file versus a results and value kind of outlook on, what are the things that you have actually done. And when you're starting out and you're a new grad, a lot of the time people are like, well, I don't have any professional experience. What results do I have to share with the world? It's now about digging into and seeing, what have you done in your schoolwork? Is there something that you've done in a project? Is there something that you've done in an extracurricular activity? Something that you did as a volunteer on the side, or maybe just a project for yourself that was a hobby? Can you express a transformation of some sort that you've helped bring people through? Doesn't have to be, we're not trying to put ourselves on the moon, but actually express the impact that you have made, not by saying what you executed necessarily. That does have a place, but like, what are the actual end results you've been able to actually create for people? That's what's got to get in on the writing.
Yeah, that's a really great piece of advice, because people think, oh, I'm not in sales. If you're in an interview, you're selling yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And people aren't buying where they're at today. They're buying where they like to be. They're buying the end result. And if you can show them how you can help them be part of the solution to getting to that end result, they are much more likely to want to invest in you versus someone who's conveying like, hey, I can help you because of what the things that it's not task oriented, it's outcome oriented, like you had said. I love that. I think that's a really good piece of advice, Mike.
I think what I'd add to that is that the resume, when you read a resume, sometimes you can tell the energy around it is really directed on the person who is the applicant, whereas a better resume would be directed toward the audience, aka the prospective employer that you're trying to interview with. If it is speaking to them and what they need, if you imagined yourself as a product or a service that they were going to just buy outright for themselves, are you the ideal fit for them? And you can easily look at your own life and any kind of a transaction you've ever entered into, especially one that has maybe a slightly higher ticket attached to it. It could be even something like a cell phone, right? Like, does the cell phone's description, does its performance, does the outcome that it will provide me with, does it match what I want to see? Because if I'm not convinced that it will, I'm going to move on to something else.
How about cover letters?
Yeah.
What are the points of cover letters? How can we stand out? How can we stand apart in our cover letter?
Doing some really great research. So, I mean, the cover letter to me has to answer the question of, why do you want to work at a given company? Because that is what's typically absent from a resume. The resume is going to be a little bit more granular on a whole bunch of levels, but the cover letter is a chance to convey some emotion in terms of just like, what is it about this company? Why should you be standing out among the stack of 250 or 300 resumes that are going after a particular job? So the more background knowledge on the company that you can bring in that's relevant to the person who would be potentially hiring you, I think the better your chances of actually establishing some rapport with them. And then just let's go back to that big word, vulnerability. Actually talk about like, how could this potential place fit in with the story of your career and why you would want to kind of make it a part of your life story. Like, people want to hire people who care about what they're doing. And it's about proving that you actually have a potential emotional tie to that new place.
I love that. I totally agree. I think one of the biggest questions I ask while I'm interviewing the candidates I'm considering is, what about us interests you? So really what I'm looking for is what, why us? And I'm not looking for a response about you. If you say, hey, I've done this type of work before, I've got a bunch of experience doing this, and this, I think I could do your role, great. That's not interesting to me. I don't care as much about that. When I ask, like, what about us interests you? And I think this could be perfect for the cover letter. I am looking for, why us specifically. Like, if you're a person that says, I'm passionate about mentoring relationships, I've had mentors in my life that helped me get to where I'm at. I wouldn't be the type of person I am today without mentors. I would love to be a part of a team, a part of a mission that's fostering and facilitating mentoring relationships for other people. That's the answer I'm looking for. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, put another way, does the person give a shit? Like, if they care about what we're doing, then great. That's the type of person I want to hire. But if they're like, this is a job to me, like, I could do this role, I could feel what you need. I'm not looking to plug holes. I'm looking to build a team. I'm looking to build a culture. I'm looking to build a group. And that is, I think, so critical to that. So that vulnerability, that story about your personal why and that attachment to the company, I think really can set someone apart.
Totally.
So let's talk about etiquette after the interview. Let's say we get a job offer. I guess one, what is the expectations there? Maybe I've never gotten a job offer before. Maybe I've never gotten an internship offer before. Do I accept it right away? Do I get a few days to think about it? What if I'm considering other offers? What does that process look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the particular situation in terms of what other offers might be on the table can impact, I think, kind of how you think through this. But I think one general point here is that in terms of etiquette and navigating this process is, when in doubt, ask for some permission. Ask, are you okay if I take the weekend or a few days past next Monday to just kind of think through this? I want to respect your time. You can be really upfront about that. Understand that they're waiting on you and that you're empathizing with that. But if you can kind of just, be really clear and honest and transparent and say that this is something that I just need to kind of weigh a little bit. I'm super happy that you've offered this to me. If they say no, I mean, look, you might be up against, between a rock and a hard place, and you've got to make a decision on something quickly. But if you're trying to buy a little bit of time, do it with questions and see what happens. It's going to also be a good test of the new potential employer. You're going to get a sense of just how flexible and patient and invested are they in you.
Fascinating. That's a really different perspective, because that question almost creates an inverse assessment of them. I think so often as the interviewees, we think to ourselves, like, okay, we have to appease this employer. We have to do what we can to fit the box they're looking for. That sounds like the reverse of it. It sounds like we're almost assessing them of whether or not we want to spend our time there, which, by the way, this is our time. I think this is an old reference. But I just saw a clip from this movie. Have you ever seen the movie Fast Times at Ridgemont High?
I have not, no.
Okay, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, movie that came out in the 70s. It's a great movie. Anybody should watch it. It came out before I was born. It's Sean Penn in it as a teenager in high school, and he plays this surfer guy. And anyways, he's in class. His name in the movie is Spicoli. And he decides to order pizza, and he decides that he's going to take his coursework seriously. And his professor is all about, well, this is my time, and I'm teaching this class here in my class. And Spicoli makes this whole argument about, well, this is our time. If I'm here and you're here, we're spending this time together. The point I'm making in all of this is that you, as an applicant, are spending your time at this company. They're spending their time on you, training you and paying you, sure, but you could have spent your time doing anything else, and you're choosing to spend it with them. And so therefore, you should be just as choosy as they are choosy with you. And if they are being strict with you, you might anticipate that that's how they're going to be for the rest of that employment with them. And that might be okay with you because you are really passionate about this, but it gives you something to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great analogy, great reference to that movie. I'm definitely going to have to go check that out. The whole idea that we're really trying to create a win-win here. When you get hired, you are bringing value to the employer. You're not just someone on your own end who's trying to find a job and stay afloat financially in your life. Like there's hopefully more to this than just that. And yeah, like you said, it is our time. It's our relationship that we have to nurture and grow. And typically speaking, like the more invested both sides are in one another, the better the prospect of this being a great match and long-term employment fit becomes. So I take your time. If an employer is not really willing to take their time with you at this point, I'd be asking some big questions there.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to be stranded homeless on the streets. You will have options as long as you work at it and you work towards it.
Yep.
You should have options at least. Well, with that said, what if I get an offer, I accept that offer, but then I get an offer from a different company? How do you handle that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely no cookie cutter approach here. I think it really comes down to what are kind of the two offers that are on the table. What are the values of the two companies and the vision and the mission? Like, what do you think you'll be more connected to when you're actually weighing the two offers? But then also look at the situation that you're in from your own value standpoint. How do you feel about potentially decommitting and saying, you know what, like, I appreciate everything, but like it wasn't enough for me to actually go all in. And so, it's sort of like, thanks for having dated me for so long. Instead of marrying you, I'm going to just go marry this other person that I met, although there was a hiring process in concert happening with that other company, probably concurrently. I mean, that's kind of the big question you've got to ask, is just like, can you live with this potential? It's not so much resentment, because there's probably going to be some of that from the first company that you withdraw from. It's normal. But are you comfortable moving forward with just the fractured relationship and just learning from that? I wouldn't say it's something that you want to do necessarily on a regular basis in your career, because especially if you're working in a pretty small industry, that is probably going to come up on people's radar pretty fast. But yeah, I mean, I think that I believe in second chances, Garrett, and I'm sure you do as well. And the reality of it is if you're going to go and sort of decommit from one employer and go in the direction with someone else, you definitely owe it to that first employer to kind of just say, hey, look, really upfront, like, there's been another really great chance for me that I think is in better alignment with what I want to do long term. I'm super thankful for your time, and if I can help you find another candidate, then I will. But I'm going to go in this direction. And hey, sometimes, we have to make the hard decisions in life to have an easier life.
And I think that's a great response to that. I think that perspective you gave of being open to helping them to get there is great. Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, because most students will get their offer in the middle of the school year, they might actually spend time training you already. I mean, sure, they might have, put you on a docket and they're planning on maybe getting you trained up in May or June, but it hasn't gotten to that point yet. I think that approach is great, because we had a previous speaker last semester. His name's Austin Belsack, and one of the things that he said was, think about them. Are they going to stick by you when shit hits the fan, or are they going to cut you loose? And I think that is something that's really fascinating, especially in this coronavirus period, for how many people have been furloughed and laid off from big, stable companies. I mean, at the end of the day, are they going to stick by you when things don't go your way, or are they not? And if you feel like you've got a greater growth opportunity, you've got to do right by yourself. But be respectful at the same time. Be willing to help them fill that role if necessary. So, Mike, this has been great. I want to ask the audience one last question before we go into our couple final questions. This last question is, and this is to the students, I wanted to know, what are you going to do differently in your next interview? Post in the comment section. I would love to learn that. What are you going to do differently in your next interview? So, Mike, my last question to you is, what is the big overall take? If students could take anything away from you in this, this workshop on how to prepare for the interview, what is that?
I would say it is knowing your audience and having a story or set of stories that are ready and that are relevant to that audience based off of the problems that they have, and that also communicate the value that you would bring to that audience, or in this case, an employer.
I love that. I love that. One thing that I think is a pretty great takeaway, and we didn't even talk about it much, but I've been thinking about this more and more about the interviews, is coming into the interview like as if you already have a job and that you're just doing this for formalities. So often students are so nervous to go into the interview, and they word vomit, or they say something they don't mean, or it didn't come out the way they wanted it to because they were just so nervous. Doing a power post, shaking it out, getting it loose before an interview, and coming in as if like, I don't need this, I'm independently wealthy, or I've got opportunities in mass. Like, if you want to make an offer to me, fantastic, I'll consider it, but this is not something I need. Once you can get almost into this like, I'm too cool for school mentality, you're going to be so much more calmer and relaxed when you're giving your responses in the interview.
Absolutely. Yep. You have value. You should believe in it.
Exactly. So, Mike, how can our audience find you? How can our students learn more about you and your work and what you're doing with Coach Wuzzo?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you can definitely check out my website, which is coachwuzzo.com, OISEAU. Just a quick primer there. That's Wuzzo is French for bird, my last name, and sort of a reflection of my life and where I live in a very bilingual and French-speaking city. So coachwuzzo.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on that platform. I'm just linkedin.com/in/birdmike. Nice and simple. Love engaging with people there. The Career Builders podcast, where we've actually had you, Garrett, as a guest in the past. You could go to careerbuilderspodcast.com, and we'll get to know each other pretty well from there.
Absolutely. And all of our students use LinkedIn, so they'll probably reach out to you on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome.
Perfect. Well, Mike, thanks for being here. This has been a great workshop this evening. Students, thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your night. See you later, everybody.
See ya.